falls and rises. When I was first a young lady in work, I had to get myself housed because they don't house you if you're single and you're not ill or anything, right? I had to house myself. And it was almost unaffordable, and I had to tell the usual round of lies to get a mortgage company to let me have a loan, right? Now, people can't borrow that amount of money, and they've cut credit on everyone, which means there's no work.
Exactly. I mean, I agree with all of that. That's entirely correct. And of course, you're making my case. This has been left to a private market, where now there's a financial crash, so the banks won't lend to businesses, so people lose their jobs, and they won't lend to people who want a mortgage so that they can buy their home. You can't rent a home either because they're simply not being built. So what I'm saying is we need the state to begin to take responsibility for the basic needs of people in our society, not just health and education, but housing, pensions is another, transport system, and energy, which again Shane was talking about. Energy is going to be a massive issue over the next 50 years, as there are increasing energy shortages around the world. And do you leave these to the private companies to decide whether they can make the most profit, or do you have governmental public control to ensure that energy, particularly the switch to renewable sources of energy, which is absolutely necessary because oil is going to run out in something like 40, 50 years' time. That is a phenomenal thought. But that only the state is going to make those kinds of changes which we need. Thirdly, we need much more democracy in our country. I've been in Parliament a long time. I would say we are less a democratic society today than we were when I started. If you want things changed, let me ask you as potential voters, I don't know whether you vote, but do you feel you are able to have influence on the political system, on Parliament, on business, in your workplace? If you have people who do things in your home and they make a mess of it, what sort of influence and accountability and democracy exists in our society? I would have said it's far less today than it ever has been. And we need a restoration of public democratic control, I think, at all levels. And particularly, of course, with regard to the workplace, with regard to where the money is made in industry. The current government had just set up the Office of Business, the Office of Budget Responsibility. I don't disagree with that. How about an Office of Multinational Responsibility, to ensure that the big companies where the industrial power lies are subject to corporate audit, are subject to some public controls about the way in which they use their investment and their money? Why don't we do these things? Fourthly, a total revaluation of pay and wealth. In the current leadership contest, Ed Miliband in particular, who I'm a supporter, usually happens, that's just a small commercial plug, is saying that there should be a living wage. Well, it is incredible. A living wage is about £7 in his view. I think a living wage is rather more than that. But the fact is, at the moment, a minimum wage is £5.83 an hour. £5.83. And if you look at the average pay, and that works out at about £210 a week. And that's before tax. If you look at the average pay of the chief executives of the top 100 FTSE companies, what would you say that was per week? £71,350 per week. That's the kind of society we have. If these are brilliant people, great managers, innovative entrepreneurs, fine, they should get a pretty good whack. I think we'll all agree about that. But the difference between top and bottom is absurd. It is absolutely, utterly disproportionate. And I would favour raising the living wage at the bottom and having a cap. Why don't we say that there should be a cap? That the person at the top gets no more than 12 or 15 or absolutely most 20 times the person at the bottom. So that if the person at the top wants to get more pay, he or she drags up the people below with them. I think that is a perfectly fair and reasonable system. And getting rid of tax avoidance. We are faced at the present time with a system which tells us that the bankers have made a fearful mess of it. We're £150 billion overdraft, which has got to be paid off. Well, let me tell you that tax avoidance and tax evasion, which is almost entirely the purview of the ultra-rich and of the very big companies, very big business, is about 75 billion. That's reckoned to be the amount that they secrete without paying their due taxes. Both tax avoidance, which is legal but antisocial, and tax evasion, which is illegal. If we could, we're never going to get hold of all of the money, but if we got hold of most of that money, we could pay off the public deficit in 2 years without any loss of jobs, without any reduction in public expenditure, and without the misery and the state of, I think, decay, which I fear we are going to feel over the next 3 to 5 years. Why don't we do it? That is part of an alternative system.
We all know we must do this. I mean, you're talking to the converted here for a start. But who is actually going to do this? Who is going to make the bankers, you know, give back some of that money, or all of that money that they've stolen from us? Who's going to do it? The MPs are not going to do it, because they're all paid and bought for. You know, they've sold their souls, basically. There's not one MP on that 600 odd would stand up, except for you possibly, but who will stand up and say, yes, let's do this, let's string them up from a few lampposts for a start. But not one of you will do it. You will say, we must do this, we must do that, let's do this. Why don't we do this? Why don't we do it? Because no one has the guts to do it. And if they do, more than likely, if one lone individual stands up and puts his case to the public and says, this is what we should do, he'll be bumped off. He'll be bumped off. And I think you know that, because there's been a few cases. You know, we've had Dr. Kelly, he was bumped off, as you know, and others. You know what, the Scotsman, what's his name, the ex-foreign secretary of hill climbing in Scotland? Cook, was it? What happened to him? What happened to John Smith? More than likely bumped off. Now that's going to a bit extreme, you might think, but that is a fact, and that's what's going to happen to any man that will stand up. They'll get rid of him. So what are we going to do? Who's going to do it? Are you going to do it?
The normal answer in Britain over the last 2 or 3 centuries has never been great leaders. It's the levellers, it's the Chartists, it's the suffragettes. All major change has actually come from the bottom. And okay, you do need leaders in Parliament, that's one small bit of it, but you've got to mobilise a movement out there. And the fact is, we have had our chance. That's why I feel so strongly about this with the collapse of Neo-Liberalism. They have their system. It's absolutely fundamentally collapsed. This is our opportunity to say there is an alternative and better way. And you can't just leave it to a few people in Parliament. Okay, we've had this horrendous expenses scandal, but quite apart from that, they were not doing their job. They were not representing their people. You've got to find ways of ensuring that we have a parliamentary class who seriously represent the people outside. You vote for them, you've got to make demands. You have got to answer your own question. I know you can't do it alone, I can't do it alone. We're all in this together, and I can tell you it's bloody difficult. It is very difficult answering that question. You've asked the right question. But it's one that, if we take it seriously, we've got to start somewhere. And I think a mass movement is part of it. And we need movements like this, like meetings like this, all up and down the country. And then we will begin to see the scale builds up.